The economic system of China and the political system of China is not ideal from their point of view.
Before this crisis, Asia was very much the engine of global growth. Do you think it still will be after the pandemic?
Chinese growth that used to be 10% for 30 years now slowed down because of lots of structural factors to a potential that in my view is not greater than 5%. India could be rising, but they have not done the macroeconomic and structural reform to increase potential growth from 7 to 8 or more. And last year, growth in India was only 4%. They've made many mistakes. So relatively speaking, emerging Asia is going to be better than other emerging market and advanced economies, but that should not lead to any sense of complacency, because lots needs to be done, even in emerging Asia, to remain a very dynamic part of the global economy. And in a world that is deglobalized, small open economy that rely on a lot of foreign trade will have a challenge in terms of their model of economic growth.
Do you think that we're just simply going to move back to the way things were before, or is there an opportunity to press reset, to get this new normal, the way so many around the world have been asking for?
Well, things are not going to go back to normal. You can open the stores. The question is whether they're going to come back. You know, most of the shopping centers in China are still empty. Half of the flights are not there. In Germany, they reopened the store, but who wants to go and shop? And suppose you're an individual. You either lost your jobs or you have lower income, or you could lose your job. Your income is lower. And in the US, 40% of Americans don't even have $400 for an emergency of savings. And therefore, you have less income and you have to save more in a precautionary way because this thing is going to come back. But I don't see yet any real driver and sense of this need to change completely our economic, social, and environmental model. Things will have to get worse before people are going to realize that there is the abyss in front of us, something of a catastrophe, and maybe then there'll be some collective action to change it. So unfortunately, I think they'll have to get worse before they get better.
Professor Roubini, thank you for your thoughts and for joining us on this program. That was Nouriel Roubini from New York. Here in Asia, many countries are looking past lockdowns and charting a course for recovery. We'll be hearing from our correspondents and experts in the region as to how Asia is positioned and whether it can lead the way to a new normal. Stay with us.
In the world of business, everything is connected. From global hubs to places less traveled. The big stories to your bottom line. The path can be unpredictable. But with the right insights, you can see where the bend in the road will lead. Business on BBC News. Make the connection.
COVID-19 is a global threat, yet there seems to be no global blueprint on how to ease lockdowns. In this edition of Global Questions with me, Zainab Badawi in London, we'll be looking at coronavirus crisis, lifting lockdown. How far and how fast is it safe to do so?
Welcome back to Talking Business Asia. Today, we're talking about economies in the post-pandemic world, and in particular, where Asia stands. Of course, our correspondents in the region have been living through all of this for the last few months, from lockdowns and homeschooling to stories of jobs lost and businesses shutting down. Now, they're seeing up close and personal what recovery means. Take a look.
It doesn't look like we're going to see a turning on of the tap this time round. No massive nationwide infrastructure build. Much of that's already been done, and the debt mountain is already considerably higher this time round. But we are seeing almost weekly moves to try and increase liquidity within the Chinese economy. Some interest rate cuts, all of that aimed at trying to encourage bank lending. Much of this is about keeping business afloat. Much of that is about keeping people in work. So the evidence is that in China's factories, the workforce is almost totally back, but it's nowhere near full capacity. Some of the evidence is they are moving outside of China after this corona shock, and there's been a resurgence in hostility emanating from Washington, D.C., and that will worry Beijing.
It's not business as usual yet, but Australia wants to open up the country as quickly as it can. Rules for each state differ, but gradually things like shops, cafes, restaurants and pubs are opening with restrictions. With no international tourists expected here for many months, there's going to be a big push towards domestic tourism. When it comes to kickstarting the economy, what many people hope not to see is Australia looking back to its abundant coal and natural gas industries. They say this is going to be a step backwards and a missed opportunity to try and invest in renewables.
The forecasts for Thailand are dire. GDP to shrink by almost 7%, up to 10 million jobs lost this year, and tourism, 1/5 of the economy, dead for many more months. The government is spending around $60 billion to try to keep the economy afloat. Now, around 1/4 of that is soft loans for small businesses, but they're finding them difficult to access. In desperation, the government's now called on 20 of the wealthiest tycoons to help. It isn't clear how, but it does illustrate just how much is still controlled by the largest businesses in this most unequal of societies.
The first thing to understand is that Japan has had no coronavirus lockdown. Throughout this period, the economy, much of it, has been kept open. Construction sites are still operating, factories are still rolling, and that could make it easier for Japan to ease out of this state of emergency compared to countries that have a really, really tight lockdown. But during this time, corporations have had to send hundreds of thousands of office workers home. They've had to adopt new technology, video conferencing, teleworking, and flexible working. So the question is, will Japanese corporations maintain this when the pandemic is over?
The Indian government says it will spend 10% of its GDP, that's nearly $266 billion, to revive the economy. But in reality, the actual amount could be much lesser because the plan is to repurpose and utilize existing welfare schemes and funds. The government plans to help small and medium businesses, migrant laborers, street vendors, as well as farmers. But many experts say that some of these schemes will only materialize over the next 1 year. Over 120 million people have lost their jobs over the last 2 months, and economists say that what India's poor need is cash in hand, and that too, immediately.
So, where do we go from here? Joining me to answer that is Andy Xie, an independent economist based in Shanghai, and Jonathan Wutzel, director of the McKinsey Global Institute in Los Angeles today. First, Jonathan, let me start with you. You're a big believer in how Asia was first in and then first out and is now leading the way. What are you seeing that makes you so confident?
It's too soon to tell, but at least for some of the Asian economies, we see cautious optimism, I think would be the framing around the consumer. And on the industrial side, a capacity to protect and safeguard factories and livelihoods.
Asia has an advantage in the sense that it's production-based, so the West is more service-based, so and pandemic has a bit less impact. That means that we are very dependent on the global economy, global demand. So when the pandemic is curbing the demand in the West, it's not easy for us.
Jonathan, jump in.
Well, I agree with what Andy's saying, of course. But if we look at what Asia has to fall back on, it is the potential for growth domestically, first of all, much higher than in many other regions, simply because of the ongoing trends for urbanization and productivity growth, and as well as a fairly big cushion of savings and capital to be deployed from the region.
You know, China came to the rescue after the last global financial crisis, and now it seems to be trying to take on this sort of leadership role in this particular crisis and in the recovery. How big a role do you see it playing this time round?
This version round, I don't think China is planning on coming to its own rescue in that kind of way. In fact, if anything, it's being a lot more cautious in terms of how it's stimulating the economy. We've noticed that when a stimulus check is written, the next day the property price tends to go up. That's not the way we should do this. So they are actually staying much more focused, if you will, on the real economy. And with that, I'm optimistic, as I am, about reform. So I think if China has something to share with the rest of the world this time, it will be how you can, quote, see the opportunity in a crisis and change the economy.
Andy, your thoughts? What Jonathan's laid out there is an opportunity for China to reform. Is that likely?
Well, I think that right now the government's focus is not on changing the economic model. There's no doubt that the global economy depends on China's changing. Like Jonathan said, and 1.4 billion Chinese people should become proper consumers, not just workers, which is something that people have been talking about for a long time. I think that this government was thinking about this a few years ago and finally made the decision to turn the other way, to focus on increasing social control rather than giving more money to the people to spend. So this is a political issue, not an economic issue. Now, with a lot of negative sentiment towards China, I think that the government is even less secure. So the odds of significant economic reforms are very low.
Where does that leave the rest of us, with obviously the United States still very much stuck in this as the global superpower of the day, and then the rival, China, still not being able to come out with a clear economic recovery, preoccupied with its own problems?
So the U.S. has been on the wrong track for a long time. It's focusing on short-term things, focusing on financial bubbles. So I think the U.S. is going to struggle for a long time. And it will take it out on China and focusing on decoupling as a way forward. So that is another dimension of uncertainty. The decoupling pressure will also make the Chinese government less secure. So it will not be focusing on the economic reforms. So the world will be stuck for quite a while. It's very difficult for anybody to replace China or the United States. And we need the politics to line up for major economic reforms to happen, for China to take its proper place to become the largest economy.
How much do you agree with the vision of what Andy's laid out?
This recovery, this moment of response, compare it back to 2003 or SARS, or even 2008 or 9, it's far more about the private sector than it ever was before. And I think it's almost demonstrated that China and Asia, without the private sector, can't survive. I would say that the private sector and competitiveness, this is well understood by Asian economies and by Asian policymakers. They can't kill the goose that lays the golden egg. If they want more golden eggs. And I think that is very important from a social stability point of view. I think we've all seen that when people's belly meets the backbone, they have nowhere to go but out in the street. So that's not something any political leader can support. And as a result, I think in many ways, China to some extent is locked in. It has to do more reform because that's the only way they're going to grow productivity. And that's the only way they're going to develop income. You can hold on it for a little while, but you can't hold on it forever. And I think Chinese people are not that patient.
How do you see this moving forward from here?
Yeah, I think that the U.S. is looking at the decoupling from China as a way forward. Doesn't matter if it works or not, it's being sold to American people. So it will happen to some extent, and it will force global companies to move the supply chain out of China and into other countries. So that would make products for the U.S. and probably for other Western countries higher because they are concerned about China's dominance in the supply chain. So that's fair. If you're willing to pay a price for a peace of mind, it's fine. But I think that other poor countries, developing countries, don't have this choice. They have to go to China for cheap things like Africa or South Asia or Middle East. So that means that the world is moving towards two-price system. It means less efficiency and therefore a slower growth.
Is that what you see, Jonathan?
The other side of this is these economies have become more capable. Their supply chains have deepened. So the things that they used to import, the intermediate goods, they have less need for that as there is more local value added. So both from the market side and from the supply chain side, what we can say is that Asia is becoming more Asian and China is becoming more Chinese. And I think that is maybe, if we want to call that decoupling, fine. But what it's expressing is actually a dynamic of economic development.
What do you think will define the next few years more, the coronavirus crisis or this hostility that we see brewing between the United States and China? Andy?
I think we are entering 2 years of like a constant talking about bigger power competition and what China will do, what the US will do. That's not very good for economic development. Government everywhere becoming much more powerful than before. That has far-reaching implications for how the market will work in the future. So I think that is that positive or negative is yet to be seen.
Jonathan?
I think that there's simply more and better educated and more capable leaders. There's more human capital and there's more marketplace in Asia. And that story of that developing marketplace and that developing capability will be the story that drives Asian growth. But I wouldn't count out the private sector. That's really the growth. That's where the opportunity is for China and for Asia to raise the quality of life and the standard of living for every one of its consumers and workers. And without that, nothing is guaranteed.
Thank you, Andy Xie in Shanghai, Jonathan Wetzel, for joining us on this program. Well, that brings us to the end of our show. From me and the rest of the team, stay safe and healthy, and thanks for watching.
As the coronavirus pandemic continues, BBC News has in-depth coverage.
Nothing says returning normality in Beijing like a traffic jam.
Brazilians are confused. Do they stay at home or get back to work?
In phase 1 of Spain's easing, Madrid is still under tight restriction. So is half the country.
See the headlines as they happen with breaking news alerts in the app. And get the full story with bbc.com/news. Follow the story for all the latest with BBC News.
Hello, thanks for joining me. Let's get a check on the weather around the globe. And in the US, we've got more storms in the forecast across the plains, along the Mississippi and all the way into the Dakotas. And in fact, on the latest satellite picture, you can see this weather system there just across northern parts of Texas and also into Oklahoma. And on Sunday, this weather front here will be responsible for sparking off further heavy showers. And that really will be the trend into Monday as well. On top of that, we've also got some heavy rain on the way for Florida. And there could be some flash flooding here over the next couple of days. Meantime, on the Pacific side, the weather's looking absolutely fine for San Francisco and Los Angeles. Here's Central America and a hot and sunny day on the way for Mexico City on Sunday. Just off the coast of the Yucatan, you can see a lot of cloud and rain there gathering, particularly across western areas of Cuba. The other side of the Caribbean, the weather's looking quiet from Puerto Rico eastwards. Across South America, showers across the Amazon basin, so the familiar picture here. Other than that, big chunk of the continent there with clear skies on Sunday. And the temperatures, Caracas 32 degrees Celsius, Brasilia at 24. Now here's Europe on Monday, and we find weather across Portugal and Spain, France and the UK as well. In fact, the weather's going to be warming up across western parts of Europe. Central and Eastern Europe, different story here. You can see a fair bit of cloud there and some rain at times. Here's Africa on Monday, and the usual story across the equatorial belt, so lots of showers here. To the south of that, the weather's also changing in Cape Town. A weather front will be moving through, bringing fresher conditions around 14 degrees on Monday. And across the Middle East, one place that's really cooled off in the last few days, that's the Levant and also northern parts of Cairo. Yes, it's still 30 degrees and sunny, but the winds are blowing out of the Mediterranean, so hence it's not quite as hot as it can be. Across the subcontinent, lots of sunshine on offer on Monday. Just some storms there to the north of Bangladesh, around Bhutan and the Tibetan region. In New Delhi, temperatures will be up to 44 degrees. Here's Monday across the Asia-Pacific region and also China. Now, this area is going to be very active on the weather front in the coming days. We're going to see extensive storms developing here, so big downpours to come across southern parts of China, at least locally, during the course of Monday. Southeast Asia, a scattering of storms. In Bangkok, around 35 degrees, and the usual story there across the tropics. Now, down under, the weather is going downhill across western parts of Australia. You can see how miserable the weather looks here around especially coastal areas, strong winds, some heavy rain. This is actually all linked to an ex-tropical cyclone, so I think the winds will be increasing in places like Perth. Around 17 degrees here on Monday. And it's pretty unsettled the other side of Australia and also across the Tasman in the north and the South Island of New Zealand. That's it for me. Thanks for watching.
Thwaites Glacier, it's an incredibly alluring and attractive place to go. I was really excited to visit because every coastline in the world will be changed by what happens in that part of Antarctica. So it's all the more important that we get there with our cameras and show people the changes that are taking place.
So we've been filming out here for an hour and a half, and this is the result. And it gives you an idea of why it's so hard to operate here.
But there's also a story about getting to where we're going. It took us 5 weeks to get to the front of the glacier. Only 4 people had ever been there before.
It has taken years of preparation to get the scientists out here.
And because of all the delays, what I didn't expect was to be camping on ice for 5 weeks.
It's shocking, and, you know, we should all be upset by what's happening here.
This is a really important story. This is something people need to know. And if we can understand it, we can do something about it.
This is BBC News with the latest headlines for viewers in the UK and around the world. The chief advisor to the British Prime Minister comes under pressure as he's accused of breaching lockdown rules twice, but cabinet ministers defend his actions.
Mr Cummings is, in the public eye. But the reality of the matter is that a 4-year-old child's welfare, I think, is the important thing.
After weeks of increasing attacks, Taliban and Afghan government forces agree a 3-day ceasefire to mark the Eid holiday. And funerals take place in Pakistan after the plane crash in a residential area of Karachi killed 97 people. And Spain continues to ease its lockdown. Tourists can travel to the country again from July, and top-flight football will resume next month. Hello, welcome to BBC News. There are new claims about the movements of the British Prime Minister's advisor, Dominic Cummings, during lockdown. He's faced calls to resign for driving more than 400 kilometres from London to the northeast of England after his wife developed coronavirus symptoms. Downing Street has defended Mr Cummings' trip to be near family, saying it had been essential for him to ensure he had childcare. Here's our political correspondent, Ian Watson.
You're supposed to be more than 2 metres apart.
Boris Johnson's senior advisor Dominic Cummings lecturing reporters on social distancing, but his opponents accuse him of breaking the lockdown rules himself. When his wife became ill at the end of March, she and their 4-year-old child didn't self-isolate at their London home, but travelled more than 250 miles to County Durham.
Well, it's a question of doing the right thing. It's not about what you guys think.
The government's guidance on self-isolation says if you live with others and you're the first in a household to have symptoms of coronavirus, then you must stay at home for at least 7 days. But all other household members who remain well must stay at home and not leave the house for 14 days. But in a statement, Downing Street set out to explain why Boris Johnson's advisor didn't stay at home. It was essential for Dominic Cummings to ensure his young child could be properly cared for, it says. His sister and nieces had volunteered to help, so he went to a house near to, but separate from, his extended family in case their help was needed. It added his actions were in line with coronavirus guidelines. Mr. Cummings believes he behaved reasonably and legally. Durham police said they were made aware that Dominic Cummings was in the city on March the 31st, and the next day a police officer spoke to his father at his father's request. He confirmed that Dominic Cummings and his family had travelled from London and were self-isolating at part of the property. The police deemed no further action was necessary, but did provide some advice on security issues.
And welcome to today.
So where does this leave the government's stay-at-home guidance now? Is the advice now to parents that if you don't have your own extended family nearby, even when you are ill with COVID symptoms, you are allowed to leave your home, travel many miles across the country and isolate closer to your extended family?
Look, the important thing is that everyone remains in the same place whilst they're locked down, which is exactly what happened in, I think, the case you're referring to with Mr. Cummings. So the Prime Minister will have known he was staying put and he didn't come out again until he was feeling better.
But he did travel 250 miles from his London home, did he not?
Ian, the guidance says if you're living with children, keep following this advice to the best of your ability. However, we are aware that not all these measures will be possible, depending, therefore, on circumstances. I'm adding those last few words.
Senior ministers have rallied around to defend Dominic Cummings, but there have been calls for his resignation from some of his opponents.
Dominic Cummings should have done the right thing. He should have resigned. But now that he hasn't, Boris Johnson must show leadership and he must remove him from office immediately.
You know, we've had a lot of people who have been struggling throughout this pandemic and sticking by the rules. We've got care workers moving into care homes, hospital staff in staying in hotels, and they've struggled for not seeing their family. They've adhered by the rules, and he's broken them, and it's just so irresponsible.
But tonight, new allegations. Downing Street denied reports that Dominic Cummings had returned to Durham from London last month after he'd recovered. While in The Observer, there's a claim that Dominic Cummings was seen at a beauty spot about 30 miles from Durham when he was apparently self-isolating. This isn't just about Dominic Cummings, but about the guidelines that parents with virus symptoms should follow, and whether the rules that apply in your street also apply to Downing Street.
Ian Watson there. Well, our correspondent Nick Beake has been examining the fresh allegations that appear in several Sunday newspapers.
The first claim is that on Easter Sunday, so if we cast our minds back to April the 12th, someone has told the newspaper that Mr. Cummings and his family were in fact 30 miles from the property in Durham where he was apparently self-isolating. So beforehand, the assumption was he'd been there, but this particular location, Barnard Castle, 30 miles away, and Robin Lees, who is a retired chemistry teacher, has told the two newspapers that he was gobsmacked to see the top number 10 aide there on Easter Sunday. Now, I was able to talk to Mr. Lees this evening, and he said, yes, he stands by what he told the newspapers, and he was able to, in his own mind, be sure that it was Mr. Cummings because he took a note of the number plate, the car that the Cummings family he thought were using, and he said that he was able to find a photograph online and the first 5 characters of the number plate matched. So to him there was a vehicle that he saw with his own eyes matching a vehicle in a photograph with Mr. Cummings in it. So as far as he's concerned, he's confident the man he saw was Mr. Cummings, not at the property that he said he was staying at, but 30 miles away. The second of the 2 new allegations tonight, that is that on the 19th of April, Mr. Cummings was spotted again in the northeast in Durham. And this is crucial because it was days after he'd been photographed in London, having apparently recovered from the virus. So, of course, the lockdown measures were still in place. If that is the case, why was he back in the northeast of England, having apparently recovered from coronavirus? The Labour Party are talking about potential inconsistencies in the reaction from Downing Street. And specifically, we were told that Mr. Cummings and his family were at a property near where his family are. So they were staying in a house near his extended family, and apparently his sister was providing supplies which were left outside, you know, in accordance with the rules. However, Durham police are now saying that this was part of his father's property. Now, we haven't got an exact layout of what it's like there, but the update from the police in Durham is that he was staying in a part of his father's property. So that's something the Labour Party have seized upon, saying this shows another inconsistency in the official story.
That was Nick Beake there. Plenty more on the ins and outs of that story on the website, of course. Next, the Taliban and Afghan government forces are to observe a 3-day ceasefire to mark the Eid al-Fitr holiday. The group has been increasing attacks against the Afghan forces in recent weeks, despite hopes violence in the country would drop after the signing of an agreement between the insurgents and the US. That was back in February. Well, with me is our reporter, Sadaba Haidari. So what are the details that we know of this 3-day ceasefire?
So the ceasefire was announced on one of the Taliban spokesperson's Twitter. It was sudden, surprising, but also very last minute. But it's been welcomed by the Afghan government. The details of the ceasefire is that they won't carry out any attacks across the country during the 3 days of Eid, which comes off the back of the holy month of Ramadan. And this is to give the Afghan people an opportunity to celebrate Eid in peace and security. They've also said that they won't be attacking Afghan forces if they don't attack them, and also they have said that they won't cross into the territory controlled by the Afghan government, and that Afghan forces should be doing the same.
And as I mentioned just at the beginning there, this is different between what we were reporting back in February, which was an agreement between the Taliban and US forces. Remind us what's going on there.
So this seems to be separate because they have agreed to ceasefires with the Afghan government before, so it doesn't seem to be part of the deal. But the deal we know happened an agreement happened between the US and the Taliban in February, which meant that they would pave way for peace negotiations between the Afghan government and the Taliban, which has been delayed because of the escalation in violence. You might remember the attack on the maternity hospital and the other one on a funeral last week, but also lots of demands between the two sides, with the Taliban demanding 5,000 prisoners to be released. But it still seems to be efforts underway to make the peace negotiations take place.
And obviously everyone will be welcoming this 3-day ceasefire, but many will say, well, it is only 3 days. You know, there have been hopes for a ceasefire throughout the whole of Ramadan. There's been hopes for a de-escalation of violence over the last couple of months. It just doesn't seem to be happening.
Yeah, so this was very last minute. A lot of people in the country are saying, to be honest, the Afghan government suggested a ceasefire during Ramadan and said, can we have a longer period of time, which the Taliban refused. And this comes as a last-minute thing, and people in Afghanistan are wondering, why couldn't we know about this in advance? People who could, for example, prevent coronavirus and other things, health officials could have the opportunity to maybe go and carry out some tests during Eid. But as we know, Eid starts on Sunday, and it's very last minute for people to be going on about that.
All right, thank you very much, Slava. Next, funerals have taken place in Pakistan for some of the victims of Friday's plane crash in Karachi, which 97 people died. Flight data and cockpit recorders have been recovered, and an investigation into the cause of the crash is underway. But the Pakistan Pilots Association says it doesn't trust the government to investigate properly. Umair Nangiani sent this report from the scene.
So this is exactly the site where this Pakistan International Airlines plane crashed in Karachi yesterday. As you can see, this is that street where this debris is all over the place. You can see one of the parts of the wings of the aircraft here. Then there are parts of the engine and the body of the aircraft spread all over into the street. This is a very narrow street, about like 20 foot wide or something. And we've been told by the eyewitnesses here that they were inside these houses when the plane crashed here. If we can show you a little bit of what happened to the house that was trapped right into the fireball. The owner of the house said that he was inside the house praying when he heard this boom, and he rushed out. And then he realized that some of his servants who were present at this, were present close to the gate here, were badly burnt. This is the engine of the aircraft that you can see here, and this skeleton that you can see was actually cars like this one. The security agencies, when they first moved in, and the rescue workers, they had to make a place for themselves to pull the bodies out of the rubble. If we can show you the point of impact where the plane first crashed was that house, which is like 3 to 4 houses from here. This is where the plane first hit, and then it just crashed into this street. And on the impact, it went into a fireball, and the whole place caught fire.
Now to some of the latest developments on the coronavirus outbreak in the UK and around the world. More than 5 million people are now known to have contracted the coronavirus globally, and there have been more than 340,000 reported deaths. More than 97,000 of those are in the US. That's according to data from the Johns Hopkins University. A report from the Mexican government has found a 25% reduction in drug cartel activity since the start of the coronavirus crisis. However, there has been an increase in the number of murders, mostly gang-related. This is thought to be because of cartel members with more time on their hands, and they've been settling old scores. At least 40 churchgoers in the German city of Frankfurt, who attended a service after the country's lockdown was eased, have been diagnosed with COVID-19. Officials say they were following social distancing rules. And one of the world's major pilgrimage sites, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, is opening its doors again on Sunday, 2 months after it was closed due to the pandemic. Visitor numbers will be limited to 50 at a time. Spain will reopen to international tourism from July. The country is moving towards the next phase of easing restrictions, with businesses able to open next week. The Prime Minister, Pedro Sanchez, says new horizons were opening up and the government could guarantee tourists would not run any risks. Spanish football's top division, La Liga, will resume from June the 8th. Our correspondent, Guy Hedgecoe, is in Madrid.
It's obviously an enormous relief to football fans here and to the football industry, which is so enormous in Spain, that things are going to resume. We don't know exactly under what conditions. Clearly, there will be a lot of restrictions. Things won't be back to normal as they were before the lockdown. But I think just the fact that the league is going to resume with these 11 fixtures which are remaining is going to come as an enormous relief, both economically and emotionally here in Spain. There are certainly some regions which are much more used to receiving tourists, for example, down the Mediterranean coast on the east and the Costa del Sol in the south, and then cities like Madrid and Barcelona. Now, Madrid and Barcelona have been particularly hard hit by the coronavirus. So, clearly there might be a concern there for people visiting. But the government has said that the country will be open for business when it comes to tourism from the beginning of July, and that the country as a whole will be safe. Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez said that the hallmarks of Spanish tourism going forward will be environmental sustainability and safety when it comes to the coronavirus.
You are watching BBC News. I'm Lewis Vaughan-Jones. The headlines. The chief advisor to the British Prime Minister comes under pressure as he's accused of breaching lockdown rules twice, but cabinet ministers defend his actions. After weeks of increasing attacks, Taliban and Afghan government forces agree a 3-day ceasefire to mark the Eid holiday. Now, areas of the state of California are the most populous in the US and one of the worst affected by the coronavirus pandemic, have begun to move into the next phase of reopening, with various businesses that were deemed non-essential resuming business this weekend. Casinos have begun to reopen their doors over the Memorial Day weekend, and the state governor is set to offer more detail on easing restrictions, including allowing Hollywood film and TV production to resume this Monday. Well, one of the toughest restrictions for the Sunshine State is to abide by the ban on sunbathing on the beach. So as the state begins to ease restrictions, let's speak to James Gartland. He's the chief lifeguard for the city of San Diego. Good to see you. Thanks very much for being with us. So just talk us through how the restrictions on the beach are working there.
How are you, Lewis? Good to talk to you this evening. The restrictions are going well in San Diego. We're getting pretty good compliance from most of the people out there. We've restricted it to running, swimming, walking, surfing, and active paddling. So you still can't sit on the beaches here, but it is going well. We do have our hands full. This is a crowded holiday weekend.
And is that frustrating for people going to the beach but not being able to sit down and sunbathe?
Well, when we started out, we saw a lot of smiling faces. People were very happy just to get back on the beach and be able to be out there. That's starting to wear off a little bit, but people are still complying. And, you know, there's certainly some outliers out there that are a little frustrated, but people are complying and they're happy to be able to use the beach, and they keep moving along. So there's not a ton of sitting or laying down. And so the police and the lifeguards have their hands full warning people and keeping people moving.
OK, so this is the kind of the first phase. What happens then in the second phase of restrictions being eased there?
The next phase, we do open it up to sitting, but you must 6-foot distance and wear a mask, obviously. So that would be phase 2 of the lifeguard plan. The region, the Southern California region lifeguards here got together and put a plan together. So next phase would be allowing sitting, allowing some activities like shore fishing, and opening up the parking lots a little bit to keep that capacity to where it's manageable.
And is there a rough timeline on that?
There is not. So the experts, the medical experts, and the governor's office, the county folks, they're the ones who kind of decide the timeline, and that's data-driven.
OK, yeah, well, as so much, you've got to be driven by the science in these situations. But, of course, we're dealing with people and emotions and wanting to get out and taste that freedom. And surely now they've had a bit of it by being able to run and walk. They'll want life to get back to normal as quickly as possible now.
Absolutely. And this is, so businesses are starting to open up as well. So people are starting to feel a little bit more of the norm. But this is a holiday weekend, and it is extremely hot here in Southern California. It's a beautiful day and beautiful weather, and it's a great beach weekend, but it's not a normal holiday beach weekend. You have to keep moving. It's really open for you to come in, get your exercise, keep moving, and then head back home and comply with that stay-at-home order.
Really good to talk to you. Thanks for letting us know exactly what the situation is there, James. That's James Garland.
Thanks, sir. Have a great night.
Well, next, we're going to stay in the US, where the number of deaths due to coronavirus in New York State has fallen to 84, the first time the figure has been below 100 since lockdown began back in March. New York has been the epicenter, of course, of the virus in the US. At the height of the outbreak last month, more than 800 people a day were dying. Much of New York State has now started a phased reopening, with Long Island set to start reopening from Wednesday. Health authorities in China have recorded no new coronavirus infections for the first time since the outbreak began in the city of Wuhan. The country has seen a sharp fall in locally transmitted cases since March, as major restrictions on people's movements were introduced to help control the epidemic. Well, France has set out details of the quarantine measures it's introducing on June the 8th, when Britain imposes restrictions on arrivals. The French Foreign Ministry said British visitors would be invited to self-isolate for 14 days. It comes after the British Home Secretary announced quarantine plans for most visitors to the UK from the same date. Next, beaches across Cyprus have reopened as the Mediterranean island nation gradually eases lockdown there. The country's health ministry issued strict social distancing guidelines for beachgoers. It comes days after a short heat wave in the region saw temperatures hit 43 degrees Celsius. Cyprus partially sealed its borders ahead of most European nations, managing to keep the number of coronavirus-related deaths to fewer than 20. Lockdown has presented real challenges for many people's mental health. A new survey suggests young people are particularly affected, with 2 in 5 saying they're experiencing increased levels of anxiety. The report is published as part of Mental Health Awareness Week, as Ashley John Baptiste reports.
It's a lot of meals.
Everyone has been impacted by the coronavirus lockdown.
Like 300 people.
Yet despite challenges, many people are getting by through acts of kindness. Johnny is a chef in London who's been furloughed. And now,
I'm literally going to go home so happy today now.
He is using his time and talent for another purpose, to help rough sleepers. According to the Mental Health Foundation, almost 2/3 of adults say that being kind to others has a positive impact on their mental health.
Did you get extra waters?
Something that Johnny knows all too well.
We're doing like 250 meals every day. It's definitely warming, for sure. It's nice to see that what we're doing is actually making an impact. Being kind to anyone is going to make you feel better about yourself.
Yet while some are finding ways of coping, for many, the pressure of a national lockdown is taking its toll, particularly when it comes to young people. According to the Prince's Trust, 43% of young people say their anxiety levels have increased due to the pandemic, and nearly half say they don't feel in control of their lives. 16-year-old Owen Hardin from Brighton was struggling with his mental health at the start of the lockdown. Soon after, he went missing from home. His mum Stella has seen the impact.
It's definitely important that we talk about it and we consider it. It's always important that we talk about mental and emotional health, lockdown or no lockdown. Young people perhaps haven't developed into the calm adult human beings that we've become. Their hormones are all over the place. Sometimes things seem really, really huge for them. They might make snap decisions. Their mental health might deteriorate more quickly than somebody who's older.
Almost 2/3 of people around the UK surveyed for the Mental Health Foundation said that when people are kind to them, their mental health improves. For many, it has a vital role during the lockdown.
We are calling for a much kinder society, one that really protects and really prioritises our mental health. And that would mean not just tracking economic progress, but also measuring our health and well-being.
Ashley John-Baptiste, BBC News.
A large fire has engulfed parts of the popular Fisherman's Wharf in San Francisco. The area is closed due to the coronavirus lockdown, but there are fears for homeless people who use the building for shelter. Freya Cole reports.
Overlooking the northern waterfront of Fisherman's Wharf, the glow of flames and a thick plume of smoke. By the time fire crews arrived to the warehouse, the blaze was out of their control. It took a huge effort to get the upper hand.
We have roughly 50 fire apparatus and 150 firefighters.
Authorities say the warehouse is vacant at night, but admit there are fears for homeless people who are known to use the building for a place to sleep. Docked next to the wharf is a World War II Liberty ship. Authorities needed resources from the ground and in the water to save the historic vessel.
If we're looking for one positive to come out of this tragic event, saving a historic World War II vessel at the beginning of Memorial Day weekend is something we should all be proud of as a community.
Authorities say their priority now is to check if anyone was inside and how the fire started. Freya Cole, BBC News.
And just before I go, an alligator who survived World War II in Berlin and was rumoured wrongly to belong to Adolf Hitler has died aged 84. Saturn was his name, and he was given to Berlin Zoo by the US back in 1936. He escaped the zoo being bombed in 1943. And then it was a bit of a mystery where he spent the next 3 years before turning up in Moscow in 1946. His keepers say he loved being massaged with a brush and was able to crack steel feeding tongs and bits of concrete with his teeth. That's it from me. Get me on Twitter at @LVaughanJones. I'm Lewis Vaughan-Jones. This is BBC News. Bye-bye.
Hello, Thomas Schaffernacker here with your latest forecast for the Asia-Pacific region. And the latest satellite picture shows most of the storm clouds out to sea, in fact, stretching from Southeast Asia, south of China and south of Japan. But what we are going to see through Monday and Tuesday, big thunderstorms erupting across southern areas of China here, and some of them could be really nasty. Some flash flooding potentially in one or two places. Across Southeast Asia, a scattering of storms as well, so pretty much business as usual on the weather front. And the same goes for Malaysia and across Indonesia and into Papua New Guinea. And you can see the high temperatures there for Monday. Let's have a look at the city forecast for the next few days. It's certainly going to be hotting up in Beijing. On Monday, only 21. By Tuesday, it's 28. And then we could be getting up into the mid-30s later on in the week. Let's have a look at the weather across Australia now. And also Sunday and into Monday, we'll see the weather going downhill in the west here. Actually, wind and rain all linked to an ex-tropical weather system. The other side of Australia, it's also unsettled close to Sydney, and weather systems also moving through New Zealand Sunday and into Monday, so some rain for both the North and the South Island of New Zealand. Let's have a look at some cities. In Sydney, the weather's going to be quite changeable, hovering around the 20-degree mark over the coming days. Bye-bye.
True ขอเคียงข้างคุณสู้โควิดพัฒนาแอปพลิเคชันใหม่ที่ช่วยให้การงานและการเรียนของคุณไม่มีสะดุด True V Room ห้องประชุมเสมือนจริงให้คุณประชุมหรือเรียนออนไลน์ปลอดภัยใช้งานง่ายฟรีเพียงโหลดแอปแล้วสร้างห้องสนทนาและส่งคำเชิญจากนั้น True V Room จะเปลี่ยนบ้านคุณให้เป็นห้องประชุมหรือห้องเรียนเสมือนจริงให้คุณและทีมต่องานกันติดปลอดภัยมากกว่าด้วยระบบรหัสผ่านก่อนเข้าร่วมห้องสนทนาใช้งานได้ต่อเนื่องไม่จำกัดเวลาให้คุณแสดงข้อมูลบนหน้าจอแล้วเห็นได้พร้อมกันและแสดงเนื้อหาจาก YouTube ได้พร้อมเสียงคมชัดระดับ HD แอปประชุมออนไลน์ที่ปลอดภัยและโหลดฟรีพิเศษวันนี้ถึง31พฤษภาคม2563ลูกค้า TrueMove H ใช้แอปไม่เสียค่าเน็ต True V Room เชื่อมต่อแบบมีคุณภาพเพื่อคนไทยทุกคนโหลดเลยวันนี้ฟรีทั้ง2ระบบปฏิบัติการ
Here in Turkey, it's the first phase of what's been called a normalisation plan. Shopping malls can reopen, but temperatures will be taken on the way in.
No politician here wants to squander that initial success by returning to normal life, by lifting all those restrictions too quickly.
The coronavirus is becoming a defining and some would say deeply unsettling moment in the relationship between the world's two economic superpowers.
It is far from normal. Monitoring, surveillance of some kind are likely to be a key part of the route out of lockdown.
We break stories from more places than any other international news broadcaster. We are the leaders in global breaking news.
Brazil's death toll is rising and infections are spreading fast. But with so little testing, the government's been accused of vastly underreporting the problem. And with a president who's called COVID-19 the sniffles in the past, the situation feels like it's spiralling out of control. For more, join me, Katie Watson, on BBC World News.
This is BBC News, the headlines. The British Prime Minister's closest aide, Dominic Cummings, is facing further allegations that he breached lockdown rules. Earlier, he and the government insisted he'd acted reasonably and legally by driving from London to County Durham in March while his wife had coronavirus, so his family could help with childcare. The Taliban in Afghanistan has declared a ceasefire for the 3 days of Muslim festival of Eid. The militant group has stepped up its attacks in recent weeks, but now says they will restrict themselves to defensive operations. The Afghan president has ordered the army to respect the truce. And funerals have been taking place in Pakistan for some of the victims of Friday's plane crash in Karachi, in which 97 people died. The government has launched an official inquiry, but the Pakistani Pilots Association says it has no faith in the official investigation.
All the latest news and reviews now on BBC World News from the US cinema scene, with reports from Hollywood and New York. Talking movies.
Hello from New York, I'm Tom Brooks, sitting on a bench here in Central Park, not far from my home, to bring you a special Festivals and the Pandemic edition of Talking Movies. In today's programme, we'll be looking at how top film festivals around the world are in crisis. Many have been cancelled, postponed or moved online. Also, the Oscars race thrown into total disarray by the pandemic. What films will garner nominations, and will the Academy Awards be moved to possibly the middle of 2021? And with blockbuster season usually kicking off at this time of the year, we look at some movies just right for holiday time. And how an ingenious new project in Berlin has been unifying communities in these pandemic times by bringing cinema into people's backyards. If these were normal times, then this weekend would mark the end of the Cannes Film Festival, one of my favourite movie events of the year. But this year, Cannes was cancelled because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, joining me from close to her home in West London is my colleague Emma Jones. Now, Emma, you're going to be doing a report in a minute on the impact of Cannes being cancelled on the film industry, but I wanted to know, what is it that you like about Cannes? Because I know you're a seasoned veteran. For me, I love the fact that you can be guaranteed of actually getting to see excellent cinema, which isn't true of a lot of film festivals. Then there is the sheer physical beauty of the place. It's on the French Riviera. What can beat that? And then I have to admit it, I love the food. The baguettes, the cheese, the croissant, the fresh French butter. It's all delicious. What is it that you like about Cannes?
Tom, like you, I think I love the Riviera lifestyle, and that includes the food and the drink and the weather. But what I really love about Cannes is the atmosphere. It feels like summer camp for the entire film industry, where we all get the privilege of getting to go down to the French Riviera together and to be together in that community experience. There's such a frenzy of activity going on, and then there's this discovery of films that we can all discuss right after seeing them for the first time. It's such a joy.
One of the things that is quite remarkable about Cannes is that over time it's launched some incredible cinema. I mean, I'm thinking there are films like Pulp Fiction and The Piano, just to mention two films. I mean, it's a very potent platform for premiering good cinema, isn't it?
There's also Parasite, which won the Palme d'Or last year and went on to be Oscar conqueror. The Cannes Film Festival is really priceless in terms of exposure of world cinema. If you think that 3 out of the 5 finalists for Best International Feature Film at this year's Oscars premiered at Cannes. Now, since the Second World War, the Cannes Film Festival has only been derailed once, in 1968, by the protests in France. But in 2020, it's off again. So what happens next?
Well, Emma, thank you very much indeed. Now let's take a look at your report.
The star-driven spectacle of Cannes, with all its extravagance and excess, might be, for the many fans it attracts each year, primarily a parade of celebrity. 2019's world premiere of Quentin Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood delivered Brad Pitt and Leonardo DiCaprio to its famous red steps. A frenzy that seems almost poignant compared with the sad spectacle of the empty Palais des Festivals in 2020. But Cannes is also where masterpieces are launched. The most recent example is Bong Joon-ho's Palme d'Or winning Parasite, which went on to collect 4 Oscars and $200 million plus in cinemas. Neon, the film company that took Parasite to its Oscar glory, would have premiered films at Cannes and will participate in the online film market, one part of the festival that will run in June. Can it replace the real thing?
It'll have to, because this is what we're left with. And so for the same reasons that, we've never released a film without the benefit of theaters, we must find a way forward. And we are actively buying films, and we're actively looking at films, and we're actively releasing films.
The festival director, Thierry Frémaux, says that in June, the official Cannes 2020 stamp of approval will be put on some of the films it would have selected, while the festival's also been invited to travel to autumn film festivals. Cannes and Venice might even present films together, which would be unprecedented. But which films?
Certainly the loudest artistic voice of his rowdy generation.
It was an open secret that Wes Anderson's The French Dispatch, set around the French bureau of a fictional newspaper, was going to premiere at Cannes.
Today started out as the best day of my life.
Pixar's Soul would almost certainly have screened, so would Top Gun Maverick.
I have to admit, I wasn't expecting an invitation back.
The blockbusters don't need the festival's help to find an audience. Dozens of other films in world cinema will. Director Ken Loach and writer Paul Laverty are in a small club of double Palme d'Or winners at Cannes, yet their films are made on shoestring budgets.
It's a big loss because if a film can make its mark there, the word gets passed around, this is a film, that ought to be shown, or it'll be popular, or they like it, then it's a big boost. I mean, it's a pivotal moment. So it's a huge loss for all cinema, but particularly for independent cinema.
Cannes has a reputation of inching towards modernity. It bans selfies on the red carpet, and 1 year controversy raged over women having to wear heels to their premieres.
Look at that sign. Better man in all his glory.
Yet this year, Spike Lee, as jury president, would have brought his new Netflix film Da 5 Bloods to screen out of competition, marking a Cannes truce with the streaming service. Netflix films were banned from competition unless they also had a French cinema release.
The good thing about not having Cannes in 2020, it's going to leave time for the organisers perhaps to reflect, and it seems to me already that they had sort of made their peace with streaming platforms such as Netflix.
There's no doubt that whatever the short-term hits to world cinema, Cannes couldn't go ahead at this point. But perhaps missing an edition gives it an even greater mystique, even for the regulars.
Hello. Hello, Emma. Hey, how's it going?
I'm okay. It's good to see you. Let me ask you about Cannes, because you're such a big supporter of it.
Immediately, I miss the ritual. We go into this place, everyone exciting. We're seeing things for the first time in their lives, and that's so wonderful about films, and the way that Cannes embodies it is that what you're in for is a discovery. And I'm sure when Cannes again begins, it'll be hopefully very emotionally charged and with new hopes.
Nearly all cinephiles would echo his sentiment as they miss the annual display of egos and excellence on the French Riviera.
It's not just Cannes that's been cancelled. The fate of other major film festivals around the world remains uncertain. Venice is hoping to hold a physical festival later this year, but that could change. And nobody knows for sure what's going to happen with the Telluride, Toronto, New York and London film festivals, all of which spells chaos for the Oscars race. And that's our focus today. Last year, the Venice Film Festival catapulted Joker into the Oscars race by giving it its top prize. Telluride in Colorado gave Renee Zellweger a huge Oscars lift for her portrayal of Judy Garland by granting her special recognition for her performance. The Toronto Film Festival gave the anti-Nazi satire Jojo Rabbit its People's Choice Award, boosting its Oscars chances. And the New York Film Festival opened with Martin Scorsese's The Irishman, endowing that movie with great Academy Awards momentum. So what's going to happen this time around with a reduced film festival presence in the offing to propel films to Oscars glory?
There will be an awards conversation. People like me, people like you are going to be looking at movies and saying, that's an awards contender, and writing about them. I mean, how else does it happen? It's just that it won't happen in a big screening room with lots of people. It'll be happening more virtually.
The end of the year is likely to be crammed full of pictures whose release has been delayed by the pandemic. So there may be a huge crush of movies competing for the attention of Oscar voters. This will also include films that have been streamed that were originally destined for release in cinemas, which the Academy has now deemed eligible for awards. How are the stars going to feel without the film festivals around to help them promote themselves to Oscar voters? Publicists who run awards campaigns for actors and movies are going to have to work extra hard and creatively, as are the big studios.
There is an industry, not just the film industry in Hollywood, but there's also an industry in getting films nominated and voted on. The juggernauts of the studios lead that industry, but at the other end of the spectrum, there are many, many firms in LA that specialize in Oscar awards campaigns. They're good at it. Is it going to be harder? Of course it's going to be harder. But remember, the Oscar awards season for publicists is like Christmas for retailers. This is where they get most of their business, much of their business, maybe not most, and this is how they make their money. Will it be harder? Much harder. Will they be paid for it? Yes.
Then, of course, there's the date of the Academy Awards set for February the 28th. With so many films perhaps being released in late 2020 and early 2021, the awards ceremony could be postponed. There's much talk of that, but no confirmation yet from the Academy.
I spoke to the CEO of the Academy, Dawn Hudson, and the president, David Rubin, and they let me know that while it is scheduled for February the 28th at this point, it is possible, and ABC is making it an open conversation, that they could change that date and push it back. There's a lot of pressure on them to move it back so that some of the films that are coming out in a very crowded corridor at the end of the year have a little more time to play in theaters.
And what of the ceremony itself? What will happen on Oscars night, especially if social distancing still prevails? It will hardly be a traditional Oscars.
I don't think that you'll be able to get 300 famous people and their assistants and their, publicists and their managers and agents. I don't think you're going to be able to get all those people in one room safely. Maybe there'll be a Zoom Oscars. Maybe it will look different, but I'm honestly not confident that the Oscars will happen in the same way that we are expecting.
But let's keep all of this in proportion. The Oscars race has been thrown into disarray, but how much does it really matter? It's a vitally important aspect of the movie business. It sheds light on great movie talent and movie magic, but it hardly seems that significant when you consider we're in the midst of a devastating pandemic that's claiming many, many lives.
I think there are more important things to worry about than the kind of dress that Scarlett Johansson might wear, or this year's Scarlett Johansson. On the other hand, it is an annual public event. It gives people a lot of pleasure. I'd love to see the Oscars happen in some form. I think what we have to realize is that the Oscars, like everything else, is going to be very different than what we've known so far.
Coming up in Talking Movies, more from our festivals and the pandemic edition. And we'll be reporting from Berlin on a new project which is unifying communities by bringing cinema to people's backyards.
With travel restrictions in place across the globe, we're inviting you to revisit some of our special journeys and favourite destinations.
Coming to you from the jungle in northern Rwanda.
So why not join us from the comfort and safety of your home for our pick of virtual vacations?
Check this out. I was not expecting this at all.
That's with me, Rajan Datta, and the Travel Show team here on BBC World News.
We don't have a need to declare ourselves an independent state. We are an independent country.
The DNA of Indonesian society is tolerance, moderate. That is what I see.
Well, I think it's very important that we have people from different backgrounds, different generations, and different genders in places of power.
Who's been affecting the climate? We have. We know that perfectly well.
When big names talk, they talk to the BBC.